580 people actually registered, so we might have about a 40% drop off. So we'll still get about 350 odd people.
That's incredible. Really cool. On YouTube?
Yeah, on YouTube.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
96 are already watching.
Sure. Arthur, like you normally do, just keep a watch on that, and we'll see where our peak is today.
Yeah. Jason, will you keep a watch on the numbers? Thanks.
Live in 56 seconds.
No pressure at all, hey?
Okay, everybody. I see we live. Sorry, I kind of missed it, the countdown. But welcome everybody on this 15th social media landscape report. Let me introduce everybody to our amazing panel like we have every year. Arthur from Worldwide Works, he's been our partner on this since inception. So it's really cool to have you, Arthur. Welcome.
Thanks, Oresti.
In this 15th. Yeah. And Tumi, we've known each other for ages. Tumi's a managing partner and head of strategy at Ligas Delaney in South Africa. Tumi's also been on one or two of our panels, so it's really cool to have you on, Tumi. Andrea Rademeyer, also executive chair and founder of Ask Africa. She's provided us with incredible insights from the TGI database, which Arthur will take us through. That information is always incredible, insightful, and it's great for brands to actually buy some of that data and use it, because from an audience perspective, it's really amazing. And newly appointed managing director Weber Shadwick, Larry, welcome. I think this is going to be your first social media landscape. So well done and congratulations on that, and welcome everyone.
Thank you.
This year, I have to say, we had an incredible response from our respondents. We've got a 40% increase in respondents. And also, not only that, I mean, what was really amazing about it is that it was really senior management, managing directors of brands and agencies that completed the survey. So we've got really some insightful responses. Arthur will take us through. What we'll do is let Arthur take us through some of the highlights, and then we'll ask questions and get more in depth into this. So Arthur, over to you, and I'll then take it over once you're done.
Thank you, Oresti. Welcome, everybody. It's always a pleasure to present these findings because there are always surprises, also non-surprises, what one would completely predict. But I have a few surprises up my sleeve, or up Ornico and Worldwide Works' sleeve. But as Oresti mentioned, it's a partnership between Ornico and Worldwide Works, but we couldn't do it without the data that we get from Ask Africa and their TGI survey. So it's such a pleasure to have Andrea on the panel with us today as well. Andrea Rademeyer, the CEO of Ask Africa, who will share her insights as well. But without further ado, this is really the key initial takeaway from the survey. And when we look at the industry survey in particular, we see it as showing a gradual reshaping of South Africa's digital habits. And some platforms still dominate in usage, but we're seeing a slow but steady fragmentation of three things: attention, purpose, and trust. And that's where trust is truly significant. It's really the core of the shift in people's attitude towards social media because of the emergence of fake identity, fake videos, and fake engagement as well. So the result of that is that the name of the report itself, or the subtitle of it, focuses on the concept of fake identity. But the result of all of this, and combined with the consumer data from TGI as well, is that the standout story is not one of a sudden upheaval, but of a population rethinking how and why it uses these platforms. Or in short, it's a quest for purpose when people are on social media now. Even if they don't realize it, that's what they want out of it. So let's first look at the social corporation based on our industry survey. We talk about South Africa's 100 biggest brands, but in fact, this year we surveyed 143 brands. It's our biggest industry survey yet in all the time that we've done the social media project. And here are the previous numbers that give you a sense of where the shift has happened. So last year, Facebook was dominant. 78% of major corporations were using Facebook, and LinkedIn came in at second at 72%, followed by Instagram at 56%, and X a fair way behind at 51%, having dropped back significantly from the year before. So let's look at the big change that occurred from 2024 to 2025. And this is the real, to me, the big surprise of this survey. That is, the new number one is LinkedIn. LinkedIn jumped from 72% of companies using it to 85% of companies. And that speaks to the trust issue as well. LinkedIn is emerging as a trusted voice. Who would have thought it? Owned by Microsoft, going to Microsoft for trust, because Meta or Facebook has, to some extent, lost our trust, dropping from actually still rising, but not as much as LinkedIn. Instagram rising significantly from 56 to 73%. X coming back somewhat from 51 to 58%. And then where are they planning to be active in the next 12 months? And yet TikTok stands out. And this isn't about trust, but about user engagement and user interest, which you'll see later why TikTok is so significant. It stands out in both the industry survey and the consumer survey. I won't spend too much time looking at the data, just to mention that TikTok is way ahead of Facebook and LinkedIn, with only YouTube really seeming to challenge it. But even YouTube has fallen back somewhat. And then we look at short video platforms, which keep emerging and keep chopping and changing. Facebook Reels has jumped from 50 to 57% of companies using it. Instagram Reels, 53 to 61. So Reels is really working for Meta. TikTok climbing steadily from 34 to 38%. But TikTok Stories also adding 22 to 27%. So when you combine TikTok Stories and regular TikTok, they're a formidable competitor to Reels. Or you could argue that Reels are a formidable competitor to TikTok, which introduced this format to a large extent. And then what we see here is companies still sticking to what they're comfortable with. Where are you spending your social media advertising budget? And Facebook has jumped from 28 to 40%. LinkedIn only marginally increased from 24 to 25%. Instagram also marginally up, But Facebook is still getting the bulk of the budget because that's where the bulk of the population still is. So what we see is the industry still putting their money where the people are. And then this was, for me, one of the standout surprises as well, is the shift in who manages the organization's social media accounts. And we saw the marketing department jumping from 34 to 39%, social media departments jumping from 24 to 31%, whereas PR has almost vanished in terms of managing the social media account. And I think what you are seeing there is the emergence of social media departments to some extent, and therefore taking over that role. PR and social media aren't the same thing, and companies are realizing that. And then, are you getting brand returns? This starts indicating the uncertainty around the role and purpose of social media. And those companies saying that they are getting brand returns from social media have dropped from 80 to 75%. More significantly, those that are unsure have jumped from 12% to 22% in terms of getting those returns. So there's a lot of uncertainty around social media. Live event platforms have emerged in a big way in recent years, but interestingly, Instagram has dropped quite a bit, and so has TikTok in terms of live events, where as Facebook has maintained its positioning of a third of companies using it. But when we asked, do you plan to use it in the future, you can see that uncertainty of how to make it work for them has resulted in a drop of the proportion of companies wanting to use it in the future from 49 to 43%. And a huge 57% saying no, they don't plan to use live event platforms in the future because they're quite perilous. So far, nothing has gone wrong with today's event, but watch the space. Anything can happen. Then do you use programmatic advertising tools? And we see that pretty steady from 24 to 25. In fact, over the last 3 years, it's stayed steady. And in terms of return on investment, it's also remained fairly steady, although it jumped last year and then fell back again this year. And again, the number of or the proportion of companies that are uncertain about it has increased quite a bit back to 2023 levels. So again, underlying a lot of uncertainty in this environment. And then have you allocated budget towards new technology? And the sad story here is that it's actually dropped. The number of companies that are allocating budget to new technologies is falling. So companies are nervous about the new technology, but you'll see there's another side to that story as well. Which do you utilize? And we see a massive jump in the utilization of AI. General AI from 47% to 75%, and AI for search and chat from 59% to 76%. So 3/4 of companies using AI very actively. They're just not investing in it. They using the cheap and nasty versions. Free ChatGPT, anybody? I don't recommend it. But what you also see, what's highly significant here, is that investment in AR and VR has plummeted by almost half, from 26% to 14%. I've always been a skeptic, and these numbers show that the industry is now joining that skepticism. Now we move on to the social consumer, and this is where the TGI data comes into the picture. And myself and my data analyst, Jason, had great fun delving into the TGI data. Delves is a word that AI likes to use. And we asked the AI to help us delve into it. And this is what it came up with. Firstly, to give you a sense of where the data is from, TGI interviewed, or Ask Africa using the TGI instrument, interviewed 24,500 people, representing over 28.7 million South Africans. And here was a small surprise, but not really a surprise. Firstly, Facebook dropping from 59% of South African adults in cities and towns using it to 56%, and TikTok taking up that slack, rising from 34% to 38%. So you can see a steady decline in Facebook and a steady rise in TikTok, and that has been the pattern for the last few years. When we look across age groups and we look at highly active users, we can see that there isn't a big gap between those who use Facebook and those who use it very actively. It's a marginal difference. So the one area where there is more of a gap is from 25 to 44 years old. Fewer or a lower proportion of highly active users. But you can see when the grannies and grandpas get into it, they are all highly active users. When we look at personal income and we compare highly active users with the general user base, we don't see much difference in terms of the different age groups. All of them have a similar level of highly active users compared to just general users on Facebook, which shows you Facebook becoming mainstream, but therefore the decline in Facebook also being a decline across all demographics. It's no one stands out in that regard. TikTok is interesting when one looks at users versus highly active users. There's quite a big gap amongst the very young, an 8% gap in terms of those who use it and those who are highly active users. And then that gap is slightly smaller as they get older, but it's a bigger gap compared to Facebook. And that tells you that TikTok isn't mainstream yet, because once general users become highly active users, it shows a mainstreaming of the platform. It's not a big gap, but it's not quite at the level that Facebook has attained that mainstream appeal yet. Same on income levels. You see that especially when you look at the highest income user, there's a big gap between users and highly active users. 60% versus 51% are using it. But what this income graph also highlights is the fact that TikTok is very much predicated on your income in terms of how actively you use it or what proportion of people use it. The higher your income, the more likely you are to use TikTok. Instagram, except for the 25 to 34s, not a massive gap between users and highly active users. But let's look at the income graph on this. And here you see a massive correlation between income and use of Instagram. The higher the income, dramatically, the more likely you are to be using Instagram. X, you can see that there's a similar level of usage, although the 25 to 34s have got a 7% gap. For the rest, there's a similar level of usage between general users and highly active users across all age groups. Again, pointing to a kind of mainstream usage. Once you're an X user, you're a fairly active X user. This does not represent me because I've kind of become very inactive on X. What's interesting with the income versus usage graph for X is that at the highest income level, there's a dramatic jump in usage of X. But once you go down the income levels, there isn't a huge differentiation between different income levels. So you can say at the highest income level that correlates with higher use of X, but for the rest, it's not a steadily declining graph. It is a graph, there is a correlation, but it's not as strong as with Instagram and TikTok. LinkedIn is always the interesting one, a big gap between those who are active versus those who are highly active, especially when you look at the most economically active group of 35 to 44s. But even 25 to 34, you see that gap to some extent. So when people are really busy at work, they don't really have time to be highly active on LinkedIn. And when it comes to personal income, similarly, as what we saw with X, the highest income groups are the most active, but it's not a dramatic correlation as you go down the income groups with usage versus income. Now we come to the companies that have got the biggest Facebook audiences versus a few other platforms we look at in a moment. And interestingly, Woolworths and Pick n Pay are neck and neck as having the most followers on Facebook, and then also in terms of the most likes. I'm just quickly having a look here. Yeah, Spar is almost non-existent compared to those two. ShopRite seems to be behind them, but when you combine ShopRite and Checkers, that is massive. And when we look at their activity and their reach, we can see Woolworths absolutely dominant in the Facebook and X environment. And this is over a 3-month period from March to May 2025. Spar, not very active. I think they've got other issues they've had to deal with. When we look at the actual usage of the platform, this is in terms of posts on Facebook and X, we can see why Woolworths is so dominant. It's because they're so active on Facebook as well. And then, strangely, Pick n Pay, despite the large audience, falls dramatically behind, even behind ShopRite. When you combine Checkers and ShopRite, they are way ahead of Pick n Pay, and Spar almost non-existent. Here we're looking specifically at retailers. Share of voice is really interesting because Woolworths has more than 50% share of voice, followed by Checkers and then ShopRite. And it's understandable with Checkers with 60-60. It's given them massive voice, but it's interesting to see how Pick n Pay almost vanishes here. But the picture changes when you look at share of conversation. In other words, people talking about them. And suddenly Spar leaps up in terms of share of conversation. And I suppose that also speaks to the tremendous issues Spar has faced. So they become a talking point. But interesting to see Pick n Pay jumping ahead of Woolworths in this regard. And Woolworths actually having the lowest share of conversation. So it's a fascinating conundrum that I'm sure Woolworths is wrestling with. And then finally, when we look at the word cloud for retail in South Africa, we see words like beauty leaping up alongside the brands themselves. So beauty appears to be what is driving the conversation and the activity around retailers on social media. The word pick also leaps out there. So clearly, stock picking is a key element of the experience of retailers online. But interesting to see, pick is Pick n Pay, in fact. And you see Pay next to Checkers and Pick next to Checkers. But Checkers, Pick n Pay, Woolworths, Spar, all leaping out from the word cloud. ShopRite, a little less so, which is interesting. So Checkers is clearly driving that ShopRite Checkers conversation online as well. So all in all, that is a whistle-stop trip through the findings. But these are the takeaways for me, is that social media has become a very deliberate ecosystem. I spoke in the beginning about purpose, and now we also see the idea that people are going there for a reason. They're very deliberate about the activity, and so are brands also becoming very deliberate, even when they're unsure about what is happening. So it's not driven by novelty or ubiquity. TikTok is surging ahead as the platform of choice for video consumption. LinkedIn is becoming the professional voice that the brands trust, and Facebook continues a steady decline. And all of this reflects changing tastes. With Facebook, it's a marginal loss of relevance across all demographics. And for LinkedIn, it's a marginal increase in relevance for the big brands. And with that, thank you very much.
Great, Arthur. Thank you very much for that. I think that's definitely a high-level whistle-stop tour of the report. But really, some of the very important aspects of the outcomes and the insights that we got while interviewing people and from the TGI data. So anybody who's watching us live, please ask questions to the panel. We've got an incredible panel, and you know, from a branding perspective, from an agency perspective, if you'd like to ask some questions, put it on the group, and in the last 10 minutes, we'll actually answer those questions. And like I said, this is a whistle-stop tour of the report. There's over 150 pages of insights and data in this report. So yeah, it really goes deep into the social media and the understanding of social media. So let's ask the first question, and I think this is the important one specifically for brands. And I'll start with you, Arthur, and we'll go through to the rest of the team. But around trust, and yes, the trust is starting to fragment. But that's really critical for brands, because brands need platforms that they can trust. And once the trust is starting to fragment, it starts becoming problematic. How do you think brands need to overcome this element in the heads of the audiences, because that's who they're trying to promote to? How do they manage that the trust issue?
Coincidentally, Oresti, this is a topic I've been researching and talking about for about 8 years now, is how you build trust into your products and into your messaging. And where the world of high tech has failed the public and the consumer is that they bolt trust on afterwards. And the key here is that you've got to plan, prepare, and deliver your products, services, and messages with the concept of trust built in. In other words, that's going to be part of your strategic thinking, is how to build trust in, where do you build trust in, and where you might be losing trust, as opposed to first preparing your messaging, your products, your services, and so on, and then saying, okay, now how do we add trust to the mix? That doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we also talk to clients about and are continuous in our workshops, and plan your stories around and build that trust. Tumi, I see you ready to answer that question. What are your...
Yes, I also think trust is a function these days of engagement. You don't have passive audiences. You don't have passive consumers, and you have very vocal consumers actually that will ask questions, interrogate, want to engage, and even recreate or reinterpret the content that is put out by brands. And I think that trust is no longer a top-down function. You know, like, it doesn't come from above, and just because you have shared the gospel, everyone believes it. I think it's a function of co-creation and being able to engage with consumers with authenticity. So for me, Arthur, you said something very important. You spoke to purpose. That's number one. And purpose, in its very nature, correlates with authenticity and being intentional. And you have also demonstrated in the report that social media is being used more intentionally. So yeah, I think trust is co-created.
Yeah,
it's not.
And I think because the audiences are losing trust in the actual platforms doesn't necessarily mean they need to lose trust in the actual brand. So I think the brand, if the brand is really promising and they're actually delivering, it still brings that trust in. If they're promising something and they're actually not delivering on their promise, that's where the trust also starts failing amongst the brands. Larry, your take on it from a content perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely trust is the currency. Very, very importantly and interestingly, I think because of the empowered consumer who can publish equally as the brand and the newsroom can publish now, and the difference with the way the consumer is doing it, and this is why influencers become a critical part of our communications landscape, is that consumers are unencumbered. There is no brand CI that they're following. There is no ethics that they're following like journalists would. And so that conversation is a lot more raw and a lot more honest and open. And so trust in that and that human connection becomes really critical in successful brand communications. And I think also equally important is what is sort of the next level for brands to start thinking about in terms of how they express their authenticity in these engagements. And I like to talk about honesty and sincerity, and I think that starts to differentiate, especially from digital doubles or AI-driven communications, is that when a brand has a lot more honesty and sincerity, they are closer to humanity, and that affinity between brands and consumers becomes even more important. But still in that same vein, beyond what a brand says and how they say it and how they package it, consumers are also looking at how brands are behaving. So it's not only corporate communications we're interested in, and this is not the only thing that consumers use to track trust, but it's also the corporate's behavior. How are you behaving as a brand, not just in the media space, but also in the way you do business, in the way you connect with your customers, in the way you connect with your partners? And how does that correlate with the things that you're saying online, the things you're saying in the media space? And if there's a discrepancy, consumers will hold you to account without a doubt, and they will make noise about it. So really, it's just connecting the dots across all of those different communications and engagement touch points, such that that connection is underscored both in behavior and in communications.
Yeah, and absolutely, Larry. And I think that the reality is for brands, it becomes quite difficult because there's so many more touch points than there used to be many years ago. So they've got to actually correlate all those touch points together. Andrea?
I'm so glad that both Larry and Tumi have touched on something which in my world means reputation. So brand trust results in reputation. And when we think about reputation in social media, we need to look at what happens in society. And there are two core fractals which have, in a sense, broken up what's happening on all these platforms, and which in my mind explain a lot of what's going on, why people are turning away from some of those brands. And one core fractal is fake news, which we understand. The other core fractal is what's happening with tech bros. Have we ever had a president being inaugurated with not his government standing behind him, but tech bros? Facebook, Microsoft didn't go, and all the others, Amazon, etc. And that, in my mind, Arthur, explains a lot of what we're seeing in the numbers. People don't want Facebook anymore with Zuckerberg. They turned away from Twitter or X for a while. So a lot of those shifts are because of the reputation of the CEOs not being trusted. So I think Tumi and Larry, you've got your work cut out for you to expand your strategies to include the actual personas of the CEOs, which explain a lot of what's happening. Because whilst Harvard tells me when I was there in January why Twitter, X, and LinkedIn are the preferred platforms for more of a scientific business perspective, that's not social media in the strictest sense. It's different. So we need to consider what reputation of the social media brand actually does to their users and their followers.
Yeah. Tumi, you want to say something? I can see.
And you make such a critical point around leadership and the embrace of social media. For years now, we have been talking about how many leaders, and it might be a generational thing, who are not native, like digital natives, let alone like social media early adopters, think that reputation, the work will speak for them. That's number one. Underestimate the significance of their advocacy, not only for what they do, but their brands. And then, of course, a crisis happens and like deer in headlights because they never imagined it would happen to them. And you see that all the time. You see it in the news cycle, how news breaks on social media, You see how it impacts, you know, the standing and you know, recommendation of brands. You see how it impacts the shares, right? The share prices of brands. And that's very significant, like really important point. Leaders need to know it can and will happen to them too.
Yeah. And I think it's around planning to me. And I know working with a lot of the brands, you often say, listen, have a plan for this crisis. And yet there's very seldom a plan around it, and everybody's running around and responding to it in a haphazard way instead of in a proper, structured, organized fashion. And so it is about the leadership without a doubt, but it's also about having a plan in order to be able to engage and manage that reputation when it happens. And I think brands also have to accommodate around their CEOs being fake identities. I mean, you see a lot of Taylor Swift or Elon Musk, etc. That those posts are not really coming from them, so that the agencies and the brands need to be able to manage that process as well, which is another dimension around that. Yeah. I also think when we're talking about trust, and I maybe the last part about trust, although it is absolutely one of the most critical discussions that we'll have around a brand because of its reputation. But I think because the younger generation are also not trusting, and they're not as active on social media as we would have expected, because this is, they're digital only. The youth are digital only natives at the end of the day. There's not like Arthur and I, who actually were into the analog side and now into the digital side. They're just into the digital. How are brands going to actually manage that process, because they're not on television anymore? Yes, radio. When I looked at the radio data, there's a lot of people still on data, but on television they're off. Print doesn't exist anymore. There is a bit of online social media. They're kind of coming off. How do brands have to manage those kind of audiences, the younger audiences? Larry?
I mean, I think it's the interest around this is it's not the first time that you would have leaders have their content written for them, for instance. You as the agency will put together a plan, perhaps interview the CEO beforehand, put together a plan written in the voice of the CEO, get it signed off and approved, and then start posting and engaging on behalf of the CEO. So I think just how the sausage is made, it's been sort of amplified by the presence of AI, and amplified by the presence of all these technologies that are available. I think the most important thing to just be aware of, first and foremost, would be the ethics of it all. And the ethics of it all, for me, are really critical at an age where digital doubles are a thing we're dealing with. And the departure point is the very persona itself that you've created online. How honest and authentic is that aligned to the brand that you're doing content for, right? I think that's the first thing. We've seen, for instance, Scarlett Johansson, I think sometime last year, sued OpenAI for using a voice that was close to hers for their voice, and they had to change their voice because there was essentially that ethics issue. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, what is the purpose of the communication? As much as consumers are really determining how and why they're using social media, I think for the brands, it's also equally important to be clear around that, which is, are you looking to connect better? I see a lot of the comments coming up from the people who are engaging in this discussion with us online. A lot of them are asking, really, what are people using LinkedIn for? Is it for awareness, or is it for engagement? So being clear about the purpose of the communication. Is the CEO going out there to put out thought leadership so there's a clarity on the values of the business and the values of that particular individual themselves? I think that's also important. And then I think thirdly is within your communications matrix as a brand, where does AI show up in a meaningful way? where, if disclosed, is not going to put a dent on your equity. And there's a place for synthetic personalities, we're not going to lie. So for instance, an FAQ page on a website, whereas before it would have been like a list of questions with answers, an effective bot can be a good replacement of that, right? If I take you 10, 12 years ago, we had RB Jacobs from FNB, we had the Honey Badger from the Joburg Zoo. Like, those were not real human beings. Those were synthetic personalities and run by multiple people behind the scenes. AI makes it even easier now. But again, just being clear around the purpose of your engagement, I think, is the first thing. The second thing is that authenticity piece. In Arthur's remarks, it came up quite a bit. And for me, I like to even stretch it even further and say, how do you bring in that honesty and sincerity, and how do you match what you're putting out online with your behavior as a CEO, as a business? If you're aligned to certain causes, let's see you participating in those causes. Let's see you in those rooms, meaningfully engaging with audiences. Because again, when what you say and what you do don't match, consumers and audiences are going to hold you to account for it. And so the authenticity of it all is not just in the type of communication, but also in the behavior itself on those platforms. And then, you know, as and when you use synthetic personalities, be clear about it, ensure that consumers are aware of it. Our ethics in South Africa, at least within the marketing charter, are quite clear about paid partnerships. They're quite clear about disclosure. So really, what does it mean to build meaningful, honest relationships with your audiences as you would with any other human being?
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect of all this. And Arthur,
You muted, Oresti.
Mute, Oresti.
oh, sorry, I thought I had muted myself. Okay, I think Arthur, you were bringing through a very important point around unsure about returns. That in our survey, brands are finding that they're unsure about the returns on social media. Do you think this could be about fake identities? Do you think it is because of the fragmentation of the audience? Is it about fragmentation of the platform, of the different social media platform? Why do you think that brands are now becoming unsure compared to previous years about the returns?
I think Andrea touched on one of the reasons for that, where we see the worlds of politics and tech intersecting, and suddenly we're caught flat-footed by the extent to which the platforms are cozying up to politicians and almost going against the ethos of many of the social media platforms over the years, where there used to be, thanks Andrea, there used to be almost a symbol of, I wouldn't say resistance, but almost rebellion against the mainstream. And that's especially when they were youth driven. Now that the old guys in suits are in charge, it takes us back to the old rock and roll concept: never trust someone in a suit. Sorry, Larry, I do trust you, but it's a shift away from that youthful rebelliousness of social media to it becoming more dressed in suits, even though you wouldn't think it from a lot of the conversation on X, especially. But I think the result of that is that brands are a little uncertain of where they stand and what stance they should take, in fact, and therefore where they should be guiding their clients. I think Larry would probably have a good insight into this from the world of corporate communications.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one, because I think even from the inception of when social media kind of blew up and brands started playing in that space, they were unsure, and I think it becomes even more and more pronounced lately because consumers are more louder, more bolder. I think brands are unsure because they're just scared. They really don't know how to navigate the space. What does it look like to put up a post that somebody is going to take and engage with however they feel in an unencumbered, uncontrolled kind of environment, right? I think that's the first one. The second one is the accountability question. Like, communities and consumers want accountability from business. We recently did some research around essentially the level of trust between governments and business, and it seems consumers are trusting governments less, and they're putting a lot of their hope in businesses. And so, if you think about the state of the world as we are talking about it, the shifts in the geopolitical space, the place and space for business to step in and make a meaningful difference is even more apparent now, because it seems people are losing trust in government. And so how businesses show up becomes increasingly important, which means if you're a business and you've got a little skeleton in your closet and it might come up, you won't be as sure-footed online as you would have otherwise have been, right? And so again, how do you match your corporate behavior with your corporate communications such that when you're held to account, you can have a meaningful conversation with your audience? I think that's that. And then also the honesty to the brand, I think, is really important. And the kind of work, for instance, that Tumi does starts to become more apparent. So I walk into the room and I'm talking to you about reputation and about the integrity of your conduct as a business and how that shows up in your communications. And Tumi walks in and says, well, as a brand, these are the attributes that are critical in your marketing and comms. And what does that golden thread look like across the board? All of this continuously being informed by insight. So again, the kind of work that Worldwide Works is doing and Ask Africa are doing, and the kind of work that Ornico is doing to keep track of these sentiments, to keep track of the shifts in the media landscape within the public sphere as well, becomes all critical. So the fear has always been there, because I think we're as businesses, we're being held to account in the public arena. And the people that are holding us to account, human beings that are holding us to account, are encumbered. They've got no holy cows about any issues, and they will call them out as openly and as honestly as possible. And so that authenticity, again, continues to become critical.
Yeah, that's coming through more and more in this conversation, but it's been like that forever. Authenticity is critical. It's not because of social media. It's just pronounced it a lot more. Andrea, you were going to add?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Andrea, you
Sorry,
go.
I'll quickly go. Regarding the fear which corporate brands have in engaging or picking their placement on social media, it's such an interesting study now where we did research across 7 African countries in North America for a highly reputable brand who'd only really used LinkedIn as a platform, because they said LinkedIn is trustworthy and they didn't want to besmirch their own brand with dicey social media brands. So they're now in the difficult position where their client base is young. They don't want LinkedIn. They want TikTok. They want Instagram. They want, well, particularly those two. Why? Because it's entertaining and they can forward it to their social setting. So the forwarding capability is particularly strong on the TikToks, Instagram, etc. So this very significant, highly reputable brand is now in a bit of a difficult situation. Do they follow their client? Because where's the client? Has to be part of this narrative. And how do they manage it? And how do they reflect it back to their own reputation? So I don't know what the answer is yet, but to Larry's point around fearing which brands you associate with on social media is a relevant and timeless comment.
If I can just jump in there, and this is coming from a place of complete like client empathy, actually. I sit often on the like inception of the brief, right? The inception side of a brand campaign, or do you know what I mean? And I am always surprised at how many clients are unwilling to commit at briefing stage to social media KPIs, just because the risk of not meeting those KPIs is too high. They would rather it be incidental. They would rather it be a pleasant surprise, or oh, it's a great outcome. Oh, thank goodness, as opposed to planning for it. And Oresti, you made the point earlier on about the significance of planning. The reality is, planning for communication or communications planning is as much an act of risk mitigation as it is an act of promotion. And I think that's often like underestimated or understated even. So we just shy away from it and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And in reality, Arthur, as you're demonstrating, with a shift in the generations and demographics of consumers and their expectations, as well as the democratization of their voice, planning for social media is important because it will happen to you either way. So taking charge is important.
Yeah, and you're right. To me, I mean, that's what we're also finding, that they are worried about setting those objectives and the goals up front because of the fact that but there's a learning in both. When you set your objective and you're not reaching it, there's a learning in that on how do you improve it going forward. So
Yes,
the fact that that you're scared of not reaching that particular goal or KPI shouldn't be a fear. It should be a learning opportunity.
In client relationships, Oresti, I often say the role of the strategist is not just at inception. The role of the strategist is always on, right?
Yeah.
In order to, and again, I'm going back to this notion of like accountability and not having a top-down relationship with information. It is you're measuring the pulse. You're understanding the ebb and flow of where the brand is going. In my world, we often talk about, how are we delivering on fresh consistency? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that is by tracking.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of questions around AI. So I'm going to try and see if we can encapsulate most of those questions in one question here. So after the survey shows that 78% of brands and agencies are now using AI like ChatGPT, etc. And aligning with the conversation we had earlier, 61% still struggle to measure ROI. Are we automating creativity without fixing fundamentals? Is it the fear of what Tumi said earlier? Is it the fear of actually measuring that ROI? Why is that?
Yes, I fully agree with Tumi that people don't actually want to have ROI revealed because they're scared that there won't actually be an ROI. But certainly, to answer your basic question, we are outsourcing not just our creativity, but a lot of our thinking to AI at the moment. But what it really comes down to is people are under incredible pressure to deliver, and AI is giving them a shortcut for part of that delivery. So they find they can get more done in certain aspects of their role if they allow AI to take over those aspects that it's capable of taking over. And I can guarantee every area that AI is capable of handling is going to be handled by AI. It's just that some people will mask that better and some will be poorer at masking that usage. So we actually have to accept it and learn to live with it. But then the onus is actually on those using it to show that they are utilizing that time, but also that capability that AI is giving them to deliver more than they would have delivered before. Instead of bringing a project in, let's say, in a week, you're bringing it in a day, but pretending it's taking a week, you should actually be spending at least part of that extra 6 days you've won to deliver a superior project, a far better project. And I'm not seeing that happen yet. I'm seeing people take the easy way out at the moment. Interestingly, Larry, in your world, especially from a PR point of view, I cannot believe how much PR I'm seeing being produced purely by AI with little effort to add quality to the output.
Yeah, and that goes on to that fact, Larry, is that you were talking about utilizing AI, but also being transparent about it earlier.
That's right.
Whether
it's using AI in imagery or in language, I think that transparency is critical. But also, I am like, you can always tell when a piece of content is written by AI. The language is sterile. And especially if it is engaging with audiences in South Africa or in Africa, like, we've got specific cultural codes that AI does not understand, whether it's language or like it's references to things that are happening locally. And so you can really pick it up when, again, brands, leaders are being inauthentic in their content and using AI. I think the hallmarks of meaningful brand communication still stand whether there's AI or not, which is like, what is your purpose of engaging, and how is that showing up on the platforms you're engaging in? Is your engagement informed by insight? Is there enough data and insight behind it? Right? Are you tracking what your consumers are saying, your audiences are saying, and is that informing the kind of content that you put out there? And then, how are you tracking their response to the content you're putting out there, and going back to your strategy and changing and iterating until you get it right? And it's an ongoing engagement throughout a campaign's lifespan, right? So technology, AI, should come and make some of those processes easy, but it does not take away the need for that human intelligence that is critical for authentic, meaningful connections.
So if I can just chime in there as well, I think just on ROI, that's number one, right? I think that the benchmarks are shifting, and AI is accelerating output in the creative world where you're measuring effectiveness on output. AI is completely accelerating that. What happens next? But for me, the great opportunity is that AI liberates like time. It gives you time for critical thinking, which is the point that Arthur was making. How do you deliver work that is more robust, that is better considered? Because the heavy lifting has been done. So outsourcing creativity is one thing. Okay, so that's great. You're going to get the images. By the way, you'll hardly get great African images because, as it turns out, we all look the same according to AI. However, what it invites is you to critically think about the input that you're giving the AI. How do you phrase your questions better? How do you have better quality conversations and better interrogations? And how do you push your work to the next level? So we speak about this in the business all the time, about really investing time and energy into critical thinking, not just delivering outputs.
Yeah, and when you're talking about creativity, specifically in the digital space, I mean, we look at a lot of creative advertising on a daily basis. And if you're looking at the digital advertising, it's not that great actually, and you can see it's just
seven fingers,
yeah. Yeah, but it's also about the sameness. You're looking at an industry, and whether it's in the banking or insurance or wherever in that digital space, the sameness is marked. You can actually see it there when you're looking at all the data across that. Guys, we've got 1 more minute. This has been a really, really interesting conversation. There has been a lot of comments and questions. We will try and get back to you and just give us a little bit of time. And I know you've asked for specific answers from specific people. So we'll get everybody to answer those particular questions. We'll pass them. Ed, our marketing guy, has done a phenomenal job on this webinar this year. We'll actually pass it out to everyone. So, guys, there is a link to either purchase this report, or there's an executive summary. If you just link on it, Ed will actually share it after this. But to the panel, thank you very, very much. It's been very insightful. I know the time, 1 hour goes very, very quickly in this kind of discussion, but I think the insights in this report are unbelievable. So maybe we carry it on and do a part 2 at some point.
Yes.
You know,
We're ready.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean,
Fantastic. Guys, and to all the audience, thank you very much. To the respondents, because this report wouldn't be there without the respondents. So absolutely thank you. Thank you to Andrea and to Arthur. And it's, there's some incredible insights, probably the best that we've had ever. So there's some really great insights and great data in this. So thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you,
so much.
everybody. Have a fantastic day.